A gunshot echoed through the stillness of dawn as Luke Winters fired his Winchester at a rattlesnake that had slithered too close to his boots, disturbing the tranquility of the New Mexico Territory wilderness he'd come to cherish. It was 1878, and like many men who'd ventured to the frontier after the Civil War, Luke had hoped to leave behind the ghosts that haunted him and carve out a solitary existence on the unforgiving land 30 miles east of Steins Pass. The dead snake lay coiled in the dirt as Luke holstered his rifle and continued his morning inspection of the cattle grazing on his modest ranch. At 32, his weathered face and calloused hands told the story of a man who'd survived both battle and the harsh realities of building a life in the West. His tall frame cast a long shadow in the early morning light, and the dark brown hat that rarely left his head was pulled low over piercing blue eyes that had seen too much suffering. "Looks like we'll need to mend the north fence again," he muttered to his horse, a chestnut mare named Penny who'd been his faithful companion for the past 5 years. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made Luke turn, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. Sheriff Thomas Blackwell rode toward him, dust kicking up behind his horse. "Morning, Luke," the sheriff called out as he approached. "Got some news you might want to hear." Luke nodded a greeting. "Sheriff, Stagecoach is bringing in a new schoolteacher today. Mayor asked if you'd be willing to provide some lumber for repairs to the schoolhouse roof. Says he'll pay fair price." Luke frowned. "Town's got a sawmill, why come asking me?" "Mills backed up with orders for the new saloon. Besides, your pine's known to be the best cut around these parts." Pride flickered briefly across Luke's face before disappearing behind his usual stoic expression. "I'll bring some in tomorrow." "Much obliged." Sheriff Blackwell hesitated before adding, "Might do you good to come into town more often, Luke." "Been what, 3 months since anyone's seen you except to buy supplies?" "Got all I need right here," Luke replied, gesturing to the sprawling landscape around them. "Don't much care for town gossip or company," the sheriff chuckled. "Every man needs some company now and then." "Been, 7 years since Margaret passed. Maybe it's time." "It's not," Luke cut him off sharply. "I don't need a wife, Thomas. Don't need anyone complicating my life. Whatever you say." The sheriff tipped his hat and turned his horse. "Lumber tomorrow, then." Luke nodded, already turning back to his fence inspection as the lawman rode away. That evening, as the sun painted the western sky in brilliant oranges and reds, Luke sat on his porch steps, whittling a piece of pine. His small but sturdy ranch house stood as testament to his skill with wood. Unlike many frontier homes hastily constructed, Luke had taken his time, ensuring every joint was perfect, every board sanded smooth. His thoughts drifted to the sheriff's words. A wife. The very idea made him uncomfortable. Margaret had been the love of his life, taken too soon by fever. Their marriage had been brief but perfect, at least in his memory. The pain of her loss had driven him west, away from Tennessee and the life they'd planned together. He had no interest in risking his heart again, yet lately the silence of his home seemed to press in on him more heavily than before. He found himself talking to Penny more often, just to hear a voice, even if it was his own. "Don't need anyone," he muttered, slicing off another curl of wood. But even as the words left his mouth, he found himself eyeing the empty space at the edge of his porch, measuring it with his gaze. The next morning, Luke loaded his wagon with the promised lumber and several additional boards. Something had compelled him to select his finest pine, what he'd been saving for no particular purpose. He told himself it was just pride in his work, wanting the town to see the quality of his timber. The ride into Steins Pass took nearly 2 hours. The small but growing town had sprung up around a silver mine, though ranching and farming supported most of the residents now. As Luke approached, he noted several new buildings since his last visit, evidence of the town's prosperity. He delivered the promised lumber to the schoolhouse, where several men were already gathered to begin repairs. The mayor, a portly man named Harrison, counted out payment for the wood. "Fine timber, Luke. Appreciate you bringing it in so promptly." Luke pocketed the money with a nod. "Need anything else? You know where to find me." He was turning to leave when a woman's laugh caught his attention. Across the street, outside the general store, a young woman was helping a child untangle a kite string. Her honey-colored hair was pinned up, but several strands had escaped to frame her face. She wore a simple blue dress, practical for the frontier but well-made. "Who's that?" Luke found himself asking before he could stop the words. The mayor followed his gaze. "Ah, that's Miss Zara Miller, our new schoolteacher. Arrived yesterday from St. Louis. Quite educated, they say, speaks French and knows astronomy." Imagine that, astronomy in Stein's Pass. Luke watched as she successfully freed the kite, handing it back to the beaming child. Her smile transformed her face, and even from a distance, Luke could see it reached her eyes. "She's staying with the Hendersons until we can arrange more permanent accommodations," the mayor continued. "Thought about putting her up in a room above the mercantile, but Jenkins said it wouldn't be proper." Luke nodded absently, still watching the schoolteacher. She glanced up then, catching his gaze. For a moment their eyes locked, and she offered a polite smile before turning back to the child. "Well, best be getting back," Luke said abruptly, climbing onto his wagon. "You should come to the social on Saturday," Mayor Harrison called after him. "Whole town will be there to welcome Miss Miller properly." Luke merely waved a hand in response and snapped the reins, eager to return to the solitude of his ranch. But as he drove, the image of the schoolteacher's smile lingered in his mind. Back at his property, Luke found himself unloading the extra lumber he'd brought, setting it aside carefully. Before he could question his actions, he began measuring and cutting. By sunset, he had the beginnings of something taking shape, a frame that would eventually become a porch swing. "Just need something to sit on," he told Penny as he rubbed her down for the night. "Gets tiresome, those porch steps." The horse nickered softly, as if unconvinced by his explanation. In town, Zara Miller was settling into her room at the Hendersons' home, unpacking the few possessions she'd brought west. At 26, she'd left behind a comfortable life in St. Louis to accept this teaching position. Her parents had been bewildered by her decision. "There's nothing for you in the territories," her mother had insisted. "No suitable society, no eligible gentleman of standing," but Zara had been determined. After breaking off her engagement to William Thornton, a banker's son who had proven to be more interested in her father's connections than in Zara herself, she'd longed for a fresh start. The advertisement seeking a teacher for the frontier town had seemed like providence. Now, arranging her books on the small shelf Mrs. Henderson had cleared for her use, Zara wondered if she'd been rash. Stein's Pass was even smaller than she'd imagined, dusty and primitive compared to the city she'd left behind. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Miller, Mrs. Henderson's kind voice called. "Supper's ready, dear." "Thank you, I'll be right down." During the meal, Mrs. Henderson and her husband Jacob regaled Zara with stories about the town and its inhabitants. "You'll meet most everyone at the social on Saturday," Mrs. Henderson said. "Though I doubt Luke Winters will show. Man's been a recluse since he arrived 7 years ago." "Luke Winters?" Zara asked, recalling the tall, solemn-faced man she'd noticed watching her earlier. "Fine rancher, keeps to himself mostly," Mr. Henderson explained. "Lost his wife back east, from what I understand. Never remarried, never seems interested in company, but he's fair in his dealings and produces some of the best lumber in the county from the pine forest on his property." "I believe I saw him today," Zara said. "Tall man, blue eyes seemed." "Intense," Mrs. Henderson nodded. "That would be Luke. Don't mind his manner, he's not unfriendly, just unused to society. His ranch is about 2 hours east. Beautiful land, I'm told, though few have been invited to see it." Zara found herself curious about the solitary rancher, though she couldn't say why. Perhaps it was the sadness she'd glimpsed in his eyes, or the way he'd looked at her, not with the usual assessment she often received from men, but with something like recognition. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity as Zara prepared the schoolhouse for the start of classes. The roof repairs were completed, and several townswomen helped her clean and organize the single room that would serve as her classroom. 17 children were enrolled, ranging in age from 6 to 15, and Zara was determined to provide them with an education that would serve them well in the changing world. Saturday arrived clear and warm. The town social was to be held in the cleared area behind the church, where tables had been set up and decorated with wildflowers. Women brought dishes to share, and several men had constructed a dance floor from flat wooden boards. Zara wore her best dress, a deep green that complemented her hazel eyes. Mrs. Henderson had helped her arrange her hair in a more elaborate style than usual, with small white flowers woven through the braids. "You look lovely, dear," Mrs. Henderson said approvingly. "You'll have every unmarried man in town at your feet by evening's end," Zara laughed. "I haven't come here looking for a husband, Mrs. Henderson. My focus is on the school and the children." "Of course, dear. But a pretty young woman like yourself, well, it would be a shame to spend your life alone." Zara didn't respond. Her failed engagement was still a tender subject. William's betrayal had left her wary of men's intentions, and she'd promised herself she wouldn't rush into another relationship. If love found her again, it would need to be with someone honest and true. The social was already underway when they arrived. A fiddle player and a man with a banjo provided lively music, and several couples were dancing. Tables groaned under the weight of food, and children ran playing between the adults. Mayor Harrison immediately approached to introduce Zara to those she hadn't yet met. She smiled and tried to remember names, though they soon became a blur. Everyone was welcoming, if curious about the city woman who'd chosen to come to their remote town. "Miss Miller, Miss Miller," a small girl tugged at her skirt. It was Emma, one of her future students, the child with the kite she'd helped days earlier. "Will you dance with us?" Zara allowed herself to be pulled into a circle of children who were performing a simple folk dance. Laughing, she joined in, following their lead and clapping in time to the music. It was during this dance that she spotted him, Luke Winters, standing at the edge of the gathering, watching. Unlike before, he wasn't on horseback or in work clothes. He dressed for the occasion in a clean white shirt and dark vest, though he still wore his hat pulled low. When he saw her notice him, he nodded slightly but made no move to approach. The children's dance ended, and Zara found herself being introduced to more townspeople. Several young men asked her to dance, and she accepted politely, though she found her gaze drifting occasionally to the spot where Luke stood, sometimes conversing quietly with the sheriff, other times simply observing the festivities. As the evening progressed and lanterns were lit against the gathering dusk, Zara finally found a moment to herself. She stepped away from the crowd, seeking a breath of fresh air. The night was beautiful, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Miss Miller." The deep voice startled her, and she turned to find Luke Winters standing a respectful distance away. "Mr. Winters," she acknowledged with a smile. "I wasn't sure you'd remember me." A flicker of something surprise perhaps crossed his face. "Hard to forget the new school teacher." "You haven't introduced yourself properly until now," she pointed out, not one for formalities. He moved to stand beside her, both of them now looking out at the desert landscape beyond the town. "You settling in all right? Everyone has been very kind," she said. "It's quite different from St. Louis, but I'm adjusting." "What brings a city woman to Stein's Pass?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Zara considered her answer. "A desire for purpose, I suppose, and perhaps adventure." Luke made a sound that might have been a short laugh. "Plenty of adventure to be had in these parts. Not all of it pleasant." "Life wasn't always pleasant in St. Louis either, Mr. Winters. At least here I feel I can make a difference." He studied her then, his blue eyes intent. "You believe that one person can make a difference?" "I do," she said firmly. "Every child taught to read, every mind open to possibilities beyond these mountains that makes a difference." Luke nodded slowly. "Admirable." After a pause, he added, "Your parents approve of your coming here." Zara smiled ruefully. "They thought I was throwing away my future. My mother particularly hoped I'd marry well and live a comfortable life in the city." "And you didn't want that?" "I wanted more than to be someone's wife," she said, then immediately regretted her words. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean, no offense taken," Luke assured her. "Different people want different things." They fell into silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The music and laughter from the social continued behind them, but Zara found herself content in this quiet moment with the reserved rancher. "Do you miss it?" she asked finally. "The city, I mean." Luke shook his head. "Never lived in a proper city, came from a small town in Tennessee, but no, I don't miss it. Found what I needed here." "And what was that?" His eyes met hers again. "Peace, space to breathe." Before Zara could respond, Mrs. Henderson's voice called out, "Zara." "Are you out here, dear?" "I should go," Zara said, oddly reluctant. "It was nice speaking with you, Mr. Winters." "Luke," he said. "Mr. Winters makes me sound like my father," she smiled. "Luke then, I'm Zara," he nodded, the barest hint of a smile touching his lips. Good night, Zara." As she rejoined the social, Zara was aware of a strange flutter in her chest. There was something compelling about Luke Winters, not just his handsome features, but the depth she sensed in him, the quiet strength. What she didn't know was that Luke watched her go with similar thoughts. For the first time in years, he'd felt a spark of genuine interest in another person. It was unexpected and not entirely welcome. He'd long ago decided his life would be solitary, and he wasn't sure he wanted that to change. Yet as he rode home later that night, he found himself picturing Zara Miller's smile, the intelligence in her eyes, the graceful way she danced with the children. And when he arrived at his ranch, he immediately went to the half-finished porch swing, working by lantern light until the frame was complete. Just needed a project, he told himself as he finally retired to bed. Nothing more to it than that. But even as he drifted to sleep, Luke knew he was lying to himself. The following week, Zara began teaching. Her classroom was filled with eager children, some who'd had schooling before, others who could barely write their names. She divided them into groups based on ability and set about creating a curriculum that would challenge each child appropriately. It was exhausting but rewarding work. By Friday, Zara collapsed into bed each night, mentally reviewing the day's lessons and planning for the next. She'd had little time to think about Luke Winters or anyone else, focused entirely on establishing her classroom routines. Saturday brought a welcome respite. With no classes to teach, Zara had planned to spend the morning exploring the area around town. Mrs. Henderson had packed her a small lunch, and Zara set out on foot, sketch pad in hand. She'd always enjoyed drawing and thought the desert landscape would provide interesting subjects. She'd been walking for about an hour, following a well-worn path that led toward a small creek when the sound of hoofbeats approached from behind. Turning, she saw Luke on horseback, leading a second horse laden with supplies. "Miss Miller," he called, slowing his mare. "Bit far from town, aren't you?" "Just exploring," she replied with a smile. "And I thought we'd agreed on Zara." A hint of color touched his cheeks. "Zara, then. Still, these parts can be dangerous for someone unfamiliar with the territory. Rattlesnakes, coyotes, occasional outlaws passing through." "Are you concerned for my safety, Luke?" she asked, a teasing note in her voice. "Would be a shame to lose our teacher before the children learn their letters," he returned, his expression serious though his eyes held a glimmer of humor. Zara laughed. "I promise I'm being careful. I'm only going as far as the creek Mrs. Henderson told me about. Apparently there are beautiful wildflowers there I'd like to sketch." Luke glanced at the sketch pad in her hands. "You're an artist." "Hardly," she said. "Just an amateur who enjoys capturing beautiful things." He nodded, then seemed to come to a decision. "My ranch is about 20 minutes further along this path. If you're interested in seeing more of the area, you're welcome to visit. Better water there than at the creek, and the view's worth seeing." The invitation surprised Zara, given what she'd heard about Luke's reclusive nature. "I wouldn't want to impose." "Wouldn't have offered if it was an imposition," he said simply. Zara considered for a moment. The proper thing would be to decline. An unmarried woman visiting a bachelor's home alone would certainly raise eyebrows in Stein's Pass. But she found herself curious about Luke's ranch, and something told her she could trust this solemn-faced man. "Thank you," she said finally. "I'd like that." Luke dismounted and led both horses alongside Zara as they continued along the path. Their conversation was sporadic but comfortable, with Luke occasionally pointing out features of the landscape or naming native plants they passed. "Have you lived here long?" Zara asked as they walked. 7 years, Luke replied. "Came west after the war. Worked cattle drives for a spell, then as a carpenter in various towns. Saved enough to buy my land 5 years ago. It must have been difficult establishing a ranch alone." He shrugged. "Had time and patience, built a little at a time. Started with just me and Penny here." He patted his mare's neck affectionately. "And now, 60 head of cattle, 20 acres of good pine, a vegetable garden that does reasonably well. It's enough." Zara heard the satisfaction in his voice. "You've built something to be proud of." He glanced at her, seeming to gauge her sincerity, then nodded. "Reckon so." As they rounded a bend in the path, Luke's ranch came into view. Zara couldn't help but gasp softly. The setting was spectacular, a natural clearing surrounded by pine forest, with mountains rising in the distance. The ranch house itself was modest in size but beautifully constructed of golden pine logs, with a wide porch wrapping around two sides. Several outbuildings were arranged nearby, and a corral held half a dozen horses. Beyond, she could see cattle grazing in a meadow that stretched toward the forest. "Luke, it's beautiful," she said honestly. He ducked his head slightly, but she caught the pleased expression before he hit it. "It serves its purpose." As they approached the house, Zara noticed something on the porch, a swing, newly constructed from the same golden pine as the house, suspended by sturdy chains from the porch ceiling. It looked oddly out of place among the otherwise utilitarian furnishings. "Did you build that?" she asked, pointing to the swing. For the first time, Luke looked uncomfortable. Had some extra lumber, seemed like a good use for it. "It's lovely," Zara said. "Perfect for enjoying the view." Luke led the horses to a hitching post and helped Zara unpack her lunch. "We can sit on the porch if you like. I need to check on a calf that was born yesterday, but I won't be long." Zara settled on the porch steps, spreading her modest lunch on a handkerchief. The view from Luke's ranch was even more spectacular than she'd imagined. Rolling hills covered in pine gave way to distant mountains, and the air was fragrant with the scent of trees and wildflowers. Luke returned faster than she'd expected, carrying a canteen of fresh water. "Calf's doing fine," he reported, settling on the steps near her but not too close. "Mother's taking good care of it." They shared a companionable silence as Zara finished her lunch. Afterward, she opened her sketch pad and began to draw the landscape, occasionally asking Luke questions about the names of mountains or trees. "May I?" he asked after a while, gesturing to her sketch. She handed him the pad, suddenly self-conscious. "It's not very good." Luke studied the drawing carefully. "I disagree. You've captured the light just right." He handed the pad back, their fingers brushing briefly. "You have a gift." Zara felt warmth spread through her at the simple compliment. "Thank you, though I think you're being kind." "Not known for false flattery," he said with a hint of a smile. As the afternoon progressed, Luke showed Zara around his property. She marveled at the craftsmanship evident in every structure, from the main house to the smallest storage shed. Everything was built with care and attention to detail. "Did you construct all this yourself?" she asked as they walked. "Most of it," Luke confirmed. "Hired help for raising the main beams of the house and barn jobs that need more than 2 hands. Rest I did alone. It must have taken years." "Had nothing but time," he said simply. "And I enjoy working with wood, something satisfying about turning raw timber into something useful." "Like that swing," Zara observed. Luke's expression turned thoughtful. "Suppose so." When it was time for Zara to return to town, Luke insisted on accompanying her the entire way. "Not safe for a woman alone, even in daylight," he said firmly when she protested that he needn't trouble himself. The ride back was mostly silent, but it was a comfortable silence. As they approached the outskirts of Stein's Pass, Zara found herself wishing the journey was longer. "Thank you for today," she said as they reached the Henderson home. "I enjoyed seeing your ranch. It's truly remarkable what you've built." Luke helped her down from the horse he'd insisted she ride while he walked alongside. "You're welcome to visit again, if you'd like." The invitation surprised her as much as the first had. "I'd like that very much." A brief smile touched his lips before he tipped his hat. "Good day, Zara." She watched him ride away, a curious mixture of emotions stirring within her. There was something about Luke Winters that intrigued her, his quiet strength, his evident skill and intelligence, the flashes of gentle humor that occasionally broke through his serious demeanor. Mrs. Henderson was waiting at the door, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Zara, dear, where have you been all day? And was that Luke Winters I saw escorting you home?" Zara explained her exploration and the unexpected invitation to Luke's ranch. Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose progressively higher as she spoke. "Well, I never," the older woman said when Zara finished. "Luke Winters inviting a visitor, and a woman at that. My dear, do you know you're the first person he's willingly invited to his property since he settled here?" "Surely that can't be true," Zara protested. "Oh, but it is. Jacob, did you hear this? Luke Winters invited our Zara to his ranch." Mr. Henderson appeared from the parlor, newspaper in hand. "Did he now? Well, that's something indeed. Man's been a hermit since he arrived. Must have seen something special in you, Miss Miller." Zara felt her cheeks grow warm. I'm sure he was just being neighborly. We happened to cross paths, that's all. The Hendersons exchanged knowing looks but didn't press further. However, as Zara prepared for bed that night, she found herself replaying the day in her mind. The peaceful ranch, the beautiful swing that seemed at odds with Luke's otherwise practical nature, the quiet conversations that had felt so natural despite his reputation for reticence. Was it possible Luke Winters was interested in her as more than just a new acquaintance? And more troubling was she beginning to feel something for the solitary rancher. Back at his ranch, Luke sat on the newly completed porch swing as darkness fell. He'd spent the evening applying a final coat of oil to the wood, and now it gleamed softly in the lantern light. He pushed it gently with one foot, setting it swaying. He hadn't intended to invite Zara to his ranch. The words had simply come out, surprising him as much as they had her. And yet, having her here hadn't been the intrusion he might have expected. Instead, her presence had somehow made the place feel more complete, as if the ranch had been waiting for someone to appreciate its beauty. "Getting fanciful in your old age," he muttered to himself, rising from the swing. Yet as he prepared for bed, Luke found himself thinking of Zara's bright smile, the intelligent questions she'd asked about his ranch, the obvious appreciation she'd shown for what he'd built. It had been a long time since he'd felt the desire for someone's good opinion, but he realized he wanted hers. "Doesn't mean anything," he told Penny as he checked on the horses one last time. "Just nice to have company occasionally." But as the days passed, Luke found himself making excuses to ride into town more frequently than he had in years. He brought eggs from his hens to trade at the general store, offered to help repair the church steps, even attended Sunday services for the first time since arriving in Steins Pass. Each time, he found opportunities to speak with Zara, brief conversations that left him thinking about her words long afterward. She was unlike any woman he'd met, educated but practical, refined yet willing to embrace the challenges of frontier life, serious about her teaching but quick to laugh at a shared joke. 2 weeks after Zara's visit to his ranch, Luke found himself volunteering to build new desks for the schoolhouse when he overheard her mentioning to Mayor Harrison that the existing furniture was inadequate for the older students. "I have the lumber," he said, approaching them after church services. "Could have them ready by end of next week." Zara's face lit up. "Luke, that would be wonderful. Are you sure it's not too much trouble?" "No trouble," he said, though in truth it would mean several days of focused work. "Need measurements, though." "Why don't you come by the schoolhouse tomorrow after classes?" she suggested. "The children leave at 3 o'clock. You could take all the measurements you need then." And so it began a pattern of meetings that could be explained by the desk project, but gradually extended beyond what was strictly necessary. Luke would arrive at the schoolhouse after the children left, sometimes bringing samples of wood for Zara's approval, other times simply helping her organize supplies or move furniture. Their conversations deepened during these afternoons. Luke learned about Zara's childhood in St. Louis, her love of literature and astronomy, her broken engagement to a banker's son who'd proven faithless. In turn, he found himself sharing stories he'd told no one else about his Tennessee upbringing, his experiences during the war, his brief marriage to Margaret, and the fever that had taken her before they could truly begin their life together. "I'm so sorry," Zara said softly when he told her of Margaret's death. They were sitting on the schoolhouse steps, the afternoon sunlight casting long shadows across the yard. "To lose someone you loved so young, it must have been devastating." Luke nodded, his throat tight. "Was a long time ago now, but yes, it was hard." "Is that why you came west, to escape the memories?" He considered her question. "Partly, also needed a fresh start, somewhere I could build something of my own without reminders." "And have you found peace here?" she asked gently. "Thought I had," he said, surprising himself with his honesty. "Now I'm not so sure." Their eyes met, and Luke saw understanding in Zara's gaze. Neither spoke the words hovering between them that something was changing, that the careful solitude he'd constructed was being challenged by feelings he hadn't expected to experience again. As promised, Luke delivered the new desks within 2 weeks, 6 beautifully crafted pieces of furniture that earned gasps of admiration from Zara and the children alike. Each was sized appropriately for different age groups, with clever features like adjustable writing surfaces and compartments for books and slates. "These are magnificent," Zara said as she examined them. "Far better than anything I expected. The children will be so proud to use them." Luke ducked his head at the praise. "Just wood and nails." "It's far more than that," she insisted. "It's craftsmanship and care. Thank you, Luke." Her sincere gratitude warmed him in a way he hadn't experienced in years. "You're welcome." That evening, as Luke sat on his porch swing watching the sunset, he acknowledged to himself what he'd been avoiding for weeks. He was falling in love with Zara Miller. The realization terrified him. Love meant vulnerability, the possibility of loss, the disruption of the carefully ordered life he'd built. Yet as he gently rocked in the swing, he'd built with thoughts of her in mind, though he hadn't admitted it, even to himself at the time. Luke knew he couldn't go back to the solitary existence he'd lived before she arrived in Stein's Pass. Zara had awakened something in him he'd thought long dead, and he wasn't sure he wanted to bury it again. The question was whether she felt anything similar for him, and if she did, whether he had the courage to act on these unexpected feelings. In town, Zara was experiencing similar turmoil. Her initial curiosity about the reserved rancher had developed into genuine affection and, increasingly, something deeper. Luke's quiet strength, his skillful hands, his unexpected moments of tenderness all had combined to create an attraction she hadn't anticipated when she'd come west. "Mrs. Henderson," she said one evening as they sat in the parlor, Zara grading papers while the older woman mended a shirt. "Do you think it's possible to truly know someone in just a few weeks?" Mrs. Henderson looked up from her sewing, a knowing smile touching her lips. "Thinking of someone in particular, dear," Zara blushed. "I'm just curious. It seems to me that some people reveal themselves quickly while others take time to truly know. Like Luke Winters, perhaps?" When Zara's blush deepened, Mrs. Henderson chuckled. "I may be old, dear, but I'm not blind. I've seen how you look at each other when you think no one's watching." "Is it that obvious?" Zara asked, mortified. "Only to someone paying attention." Mrs. Henderson set aside her mending. "To answer your question, yes, I do think it's possible to know someone's true character quickly, even if you don't know all their stories yet. Jacob and I decided to marry after just 6 weeks of courtship. Been happy for 32 years now. But Luke is so complicated, so private." "All men are complicated in their own ways, dear. The important question is whether his complications are ones you can live with, and whether he's willing to share them with you over time." Zara considered this. "I believe he might be. He's been opening up more each time we talk." "Then perhaps you should give your heart permission to follow where it's already leading." Mrs. Henderson picked up her sewing again. "Just be patient. A man like Luke, who's known loss, he'll move cautiously." The following Sunday after church, Luke approached Zara with an invitation. "Weather's turning cooler," he said, his hat in his hands. "But it's still fine for riding. Thought you might like to see more of the area before winter sets in. Tomorrow, if you're free after school." Zara's heart quickened. "I'd like that very much. I'll bring a horse for you." "Around 3:30, she nodded, aware of Mrs. Henderson's smile nearby. The next day, Zara found it difficult to focus on her teaching. The children seemed to sense her distraction and were more restless than usual. When the final bell rang at 3 o'clock, she hurried through her usual cleaning and organizing, then changed from her teaching clothes into a riding skirt she'd brought from St. Louis but had yet to wear in Stein's Pass. Luke arrived precisely when promised, leading a gentle mare with a side saddle. "Hope you don't mind Daisy," he said as he helped Zara mount. "She's older but sure-footed." "She's perfect," Zara assured him, settling into the saddle. "Where are we going?" "Thought I'd show you the high meadow above my property. Wild horses gather there sometimes this time of year." They rode at a leisurely pace, Luke pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area. Zara was struck by how much more talkative he'd become in recent weeks, as if each conversation loosened something that had been tightly bound within him. The meadow, when they reached it, was even more beautiful than Luke had described. Surrounded by pine forest, it offered a panoramic view of the mountains and valleys below. A small stream cut through one edge, and wildflowers still bloomed despite the advancing season. "Oh, Luke," Zara breathed as they dismounted. "It's magnificent." He nodded, a rare smile softening his features. Found this place my first year here, come up sometimes when I need to think. And have you brought others here? She asked, then immediately regretted the question, fearing it revealed too much of her feelings. Luke shook his head. No, just you. The simple statement hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to voice. They spread a blanket Luke had brought near the stream and shared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried fruit. Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences as they enjoyed the view and each other's company. I received a letter from my parents yesterday, Zara said as they finished eating. They're still hoping I'll come to my senses and return to St. Louis. Do you miss it? Luke asked, echoing the question she'd once asked him. Zara considered parts of it. The libraries, the concerts, certain conveniences, but not enough to leave. She looked at him directly. I've found things here I never expected. Luke held her gaze, his blue eyes intense. Such as purpose, freedom, connections that feel genuine rather than dictated by social standing. She paused, gathering her courage. And people who see me for who I truly am, not who society expects me to be. Luke nodded slowly. Know something about that feeling. As the afternoon waned, they reluctantly packed up their picnic and prepared to return. The ride back was quieter, both lost in thoughts neither was ready to express aloud. When they reached town, Luke helped Zara dismount outside the Henderson home. Their hands lingered together a moment longer than necessary. Thank you for today, Zara said softly. My pleasure. Luke hesitated, then added, would like to take you riding again if you're willing. I'd like that very much. A noise from the house made them step apart, both suddenly aware of how close they were standing. Luke tipped his hat. Good night, Zara. Good night, Luke. As October gave way to November, Luke and Zara's outings became more frequent. Twice weekly, he would appear at the schoolhouse after classes, and they would ride to various locations around Stein's Pass, sometimes to Luke's ranch, other times to scenic spots he knew in the surrounding wilderness. The townspeople noticed, of course. Speculation about their relationship became a favorite topic at the general store and after church services. Most viewed the development positively. Luke was respected despite his reclusiveness, and Zara had quickly become a beloved figure in the community. Never thought I'd see the day Luke Winters courted a woman, Sheriff Blackwell remarked to Mayor Harrison as they watched Luke help Zara into a wagon one Sunday afternoon. Man swore he'd never marry again. Love has a way of changing minds, the mayor replied sagely. And our schoolteacher is a special woman. If anyone could draw Luke out, it's her. Despite the town's approval, neither Luke nor Zara had spoken openly about their feelings. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a growing closeness that manifested in lingering glances, hands that found reasons to touch, conversations that delved deeper with each meeting. On Zara's part, the hesitation stemmed from uncertainty about Luke's readiness to love again. Though she could sense his feelings, she feared pushing too quickly might cause him to retreat back into the solitude he'd maintained for so long. For Luke, the barrier was fear that opening his heart again would lead to the same devastating loss he'd experienced with Margaret. Fear that Zara might eventually grow tired of the simple life he offered and long for the civilization she'd left behind. Yet every evening, regardless of whether he'd seen Zara that day, Luke sat on his porch swing as darkness fell, gently rocking and gazing toward town, as if the motion and direction could somehow connect him to her across the distance. The first snow of winter arrived in early December, blanketing Stein's Pass and the surrounding countryside in white. School was canceled for the day, and Zara stood at the Hendersons' window, marveling at the transformed landscape. A knock at the door startled her. Mrs. Henderson answered to find Luke standing there, snow dusting his hat and coat. Luke, what brings you to town in this weather? Mrs. Henderson asked, ushering him inside. Came to check on Zara, he said simply, his eyes finding hers across the room. Roads can be treacherous when snow first falls. Wanted to make sure you were all right. The concern in his voice warmed Zara more effectively than the fire blazing in the hearth. That's very thoughtful. As you can see, I'm perfectly safe. Luke nodded, removing his hat. Good, that's good, Mrs. Henderson, displaying the tact that had made her a beloved figure in town, suddenly remembered urgent business in the kitchen. I'll just make some coffee. You two warm yourself by the fire. When they were alone, Zara gestured for Luke to sit beside her on the small sofa. "You rode all the way from your ranch in this snow just to check on me," was worried, he admitted. "First winter's always hardest for those not used to it." "I'm touched by your concern," Zara said softly, "but surely a man as practical as you knows I'm well cared for here with the Hendersons." Luke met her gaze directly, wasn't thinking practically. The simple admission sent a flutter through Zara's chest. "Luke." Before she could continue, Mrs. Henderson returned with coffee and cookies, effectively ending the private moment. Luke stayed for an hour, the three of them chatting about winter preparations and town news. When he rose to leave, the snow had lightened, but the temperature was dropping rapidly. "You're welcome to stay in our spare room," Mrs. Henderson offered. "Roads will be better tomorrow." Luke shook his head. "Appreciate the offer, but I need to check on my stock. They'll be uneasy with the first snow." At the door, Zara handed him his coat. "Please be careful." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of the feelings growing stronger each day. "Always am," Luke assured her. He hesitated, then said in a lower voice, "Would you consider coming to my ranch for Christmas dinner? It's 2 weeks away yet, but well, thought you might like to see it in winter. It's different with the snow." Zara smiled. "I'd love to, Luke." After he left, Mrs. Henderson gave Zara a knowing look. "That man rode 10 miles in the snow just to see your face, dear. If that's not love, I don't know what is." Zara couldn't suppress her smile. "Perhaps, but he's still holding back." "Give him time," Mrs. Henderson advised. Some hearts thaw slowly, like the spring coming after a hard winter. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of school activities and Christmas preparations. The children were performing a holiday pageant, and Zara was busy helping them learn their parts and create simple costumes. Luke came to town twice during this period, once bringing a freshly cut pine tree for the schoolhouse and later delivering handcrafted wooden ornaments for the children to paint. On both occasions, he and Zara found brief moments alone, their conversations growing increasingly personal. During his second visit, as they hung the painted ornaments on the schoolhouse tree, Luke spoke of his parents both lost before the war and his childhood Christmases in Tennessee. "Mother would make gingerbread," he recalled, a rare softness in his voice. "Father always found the perfect tree." Wasn't much in the way of presents. Times were hard, but it was warm, family. "It sounds lovely," Zara said. "Different from my childhood Christmases with their formal dinners and carefully selected gifts, but beautiful in its simplicity." Luke handed her another ornament, their fingers brushing. "What would your parents think of your spending Christmas at a bachelor's ranch?" Zara laughed. "They would be scandalized, I'm sure. But Mrs. Henderson has already agreed to accompany me as chaperone, so propriety will be maintained." "Of course," Luke said, though she detected a hint of disappointment in his tone. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold. Luke arrived in town shortly after the church service, driving a sleigh he'd borrowed from a neighboring rancher. Mrs. Henderson and Zara were ready, bundled in their warmest clothes and bearing baskets of holiday foods to contribute to the meal. The ride to the ranch was magical. The landscape sparkled in the winter sunlight, and Luke had attached bells to the horse's harness that jingled merrily as they traveled. Zara sat beside him on the front seat, Mrs. Henderson comfortably arranged with blankets in the back. "It's like something from a fairy tale," Zara said, gazing at the snow-covered countryside. Luke glanced at her, his expression softening. "Never much believed in fairy tales, until recently." The simple statement made Zara's heart skip. She wanted to ask what he meant, but Mrs. Henderson chose that moment to inquire about the strange rock formation visible to their right, and the moment passed. Luke's ranch was transformed by winter. The pine forest surrounding it was heavy with snow, and icicles hung from the eaves of the buildings. Smoke curled invitingly from the chimney of the main house, and Luke had hung simple decorations, pine boughs and red berries along the porch railings. "Oh, Luke," Zara breathed as they approached. "It's beautiful." A hint of color touched his cheeks at her praise. "Did what I could, not much for decorating usually." Inside, the transformation continued. The main room of the ranch house was warmed by a blazing fire in the stone hearth. A small tree stood in one corner, decorated with wooden ornaments similar to those Luke had made for the schoolhouse. The table was set with what Zara recognized as Luke's best dishes, simple but well-made pottery that suited the surroundings perfectly. "You've gone to so much trouble, Mrs. Henderson said approvingly. "It's a proper Christmas indeed." Luke looked pleased but embarrassed by their reactions, wanted it to be nice for both of you. But his eyes lingered on Zara, and she knew the effort had been primarily for her. The day passed in pleasant conversation and shared tasks. Luke had prepared much of the meal in advance, but Zara and Mrs. Henderson insisted on helping with the final preparations. They worked together in the small kitchen, moving around each other with growing familiarity, as if they'd done this many times before. The Christmas dinner was delicious roast beef, potatoes, vegetables from Luke's root cellar, fresh bread, and a pie Mrs. Henderson had baked. They ate at the table near the fire, sharing stories and laughter. Zara noticed that Luke spoke more freely than she'd ever heard, as if having her in his home at his table had finally allowed him to fully lower his guard. After the meal, Mrs. Henderson claimed fatigue and settled into a comfortable chair near the fire with a book Luke provided, effectively giving the younger pair some privacy while maintaining propriety with her presence. Luke led Zara to the porch, where he'd cleared the snow and laid down woolen blankets on the swing. The temperature had risen slightly during the day, making it comfortable enough to sit outside if properly dressed. "Wanted to give you something," Luke said as they settled on the swing. From his pocket, he produced a small wooden box beautifully carved with a pattern of wildflowers. "Made it myself. It's not much, but it's exquisite," Zara said, running her fingers over the delicate carving. "Luke, I've never seen such fine work." He looked pleased. "Open it." Inside, nestled on a bed of soft fabric, was a pendant, a small silver star suspended from a slender chain. "It's beautiful," Zara whispered, lifting it carefully. "Reminded me of that night at the social," Luke said quietly. "When we looked at the stars together, you talked about astronomy, how the stars guide travelers home." The thoughtfulness of the gift brought tears to Zara's eyes. "Will you help me put it on?" Luke's fingers were surprisingly gentle as he fastened the chain around her neck, his touch lingering on her skin. When he finished, neither moved away. They sat close together on the swing, the silence between them charged with unspoken feelings. "Zara," Luke began, his voice low, "these past months since you came to Stein's Pass, they've been different, better." "For me as well," she said softly. "Built this swing the day after I first saw you," he admitted, gently setting it in motion with his foot. "Told myself it was just because I needed somewhere to sit in the evenings. But truth is, I built it thinking of you, hoping someday you might sit here, with me." Zara's heart raced at his confession. "Is that why you come out here every night, Mrs. Henderson mentioned that people passing by have seen you sitting here, even after dark." Luke nodded slowly. "Started as a habit, something to do with my hands with the lumber I had, then became a place to think about you, and yes, I sit here most evenings, facing toward town." "Waiting," Zara said, understanding dawning. "You've been waiting." "Suppose I have," he agreed, meeting her gaze directly. "For 7 years, told myself I didn't need anyone, that I was better alone. Then you stepped off that stagecoach and suddenly being alone didn't seem right anymore." Zara reached for his hand, twining their fingers together. "I wasn't looking for love when I came west. After William's betrayal, I thought perhaps I wasn't meant for marriage after all. I wanted independence, purpose. But then I met you, this serious, skilled man who speaks little but whose actions reveal so much of his heart." Luke's thumb traced circles on her hand. "Not good with words, never have been, but I want you to know I care for you, Zara, more than I thought possible to care for anyone again." "I care for you too, Luke, deeply." He looked at her then, his blue eyes intense with emotion. "Been thinking a lot lately about the future, about what I want." "And what do you want?" Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You," he said simply, "if you'll have me." "Not right away, no, it's too soon, that you might need time, but someday, when you're ready." Joy flooded through Zara at his words. "Luke Winters, are you proposing to me on Christmas Day?" A smile, the fullest she'd ever seen from him, transformed his face. "Reckon I am, though I don't have a ring yet. Thought this might be presumptuous." "It's not presumptuous," she assured him. "It's perfect." Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, Luke leaned forward, their lips met in a gentle kiss, sweet and full of promise. When they parted, his hand came up to cup her cheek. Been wanting to do that for months, he confessed. Zara smiled. I've been hoping you would. They sat together on the swing as twilight deepened, talking of the future they might build together, a life combining Luke's ranch and Zara's teaching, a home filled with books and handcrafted furniture, perhaps children someday. The possibilities stretched before them, bright with promise. Inside the house, Mrs. Henderson peeked through the window and smiled at the sight of the couple on the porch swing, heads bent close in conversation. She had suspected from the beginning that the solitary rancher and the educated schoolteacher might find something special in each other, despite their different backgrounds. Love, she knew, often flourished in the most unexpected places. Spring came early to Stein's Pass that year. By March, the snow had melted, revealing tender green shoots and the first wildflowers. With the improved weather, Luke and Zara were able to see each other more frequently, their courtship progressing under the approving eyes of the townspeople. True to his word, Luke had given Zara time to be certain of her feelings, though neither doubted the path they were on. He came to town several times each week, helping with various projects around the schoolhouse and escorting Zara on rides or walks in the evenings. On weekends, Mrs. Henderson would accompany Zara to Luke's ranch, where the three would enjoy meals together before the older woman discreetly occupied herself while the couple talked on the porch swing that had become the symbol of their relationship. In April, during one such visit, Luke presented Zara with a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, not the elaborate diamond she might have received in St. Louis, but a band of silver set with a small, perfect sapphire that matched Luke's eyes. Had it made in Silver City, he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. Wanted it to be as special as you are. It's perfect, Zara assured him, admiring how the stone caught the light, just like the man who gave it to me. They were married in May, in a ceremony that brought together the entire town. The church was decorated with wildflowers, and Zara wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew. Luke, looking uncharacteristically nervous in a new suit, waited at the altar as Zara walked down the aisle on Mr. Henderson's arm. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, Luke's voice steady as he promised to love and cherish Zara for all his days. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared brought tears to many eyes, including, surprisingly, those of Sheriff Blackwell, who later claimed dust had gotten in them. The celebration afterward was held outdoors, with tables set up in the town square and food contributed by every household in Stein's Pass. There was dancing and laughter, children running between the adults, and Luke and Zara at the center of it all, their happiness radiating outward to touch everyone around them. As the sun began to set, they slipped away, Luke helping Zara into the wagon he'd decorated with ribbons and flowers for the occasion. They would spend their wedding night at the ranch that would now be their shared home, with Zara moving her belongings there over the coming days. Happy? Luke asked as they drove away from town, one arm around his new wife. Zara leaned against him, her hand resting on his chest where she could feel his heartbeat. More than I ever imagined possible. At the ranch, Luke surprised her by carrying her across the threshold, a gesture that made Zara laugh with delight. Inside, she discovered he had made many small changes to accommodate her arrival, bookshelves built to house her collection, a desk positioned near the window where the light was best for grading papers, curtains hung at windows that had previously been bare. When did you do all this? She asked, touched by his thoughtfulness. Been working on it for weeks, Luke admitted. Wanted it to feel like your home, not just mine. It's our home now, Zara said, wrapping her arms around his waist, and it's perfect. Later that night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Luke whispered against Zara's hair, "Never thought I'd love again after Margaret. Believed that part of me died with her." "I understand," Zara murmured, her hand finding his. "After William's betrayal, I thought perhaps I wasn't meant to find love. We were both wrong," Luke said simply, grateful for that every day. In the months that followed, Zara and Luke established a rhythm to their life together. Zara continued teaching. Riding to town each morning on a horse Luke had chosen specifically for her, a gentle mare named Belle, who seemed to understand the importance of getting the schoolteacher to work on time. Luke would often accompany her on Fridays, taking care of business in town while she taught, then escorting her home afterward. The ranch flourished under their combined care. Zara proved to have a talent for gardening, expanding the vegetable plot and adding flower beds that brought color to the yard. Luke continued his carpentry, now with the joy of creating pieces specifically for their home and occasionally for special commissions from townspeople who had seen his work. Every evening, weather permitting, they would sit together on the porch swing after dinner, talking about their day or sometimes simply enjoying the silence and each other's company. It became their special time, a ritual that anchored their marriage and reminded them of the courtship that had brought them together. Word of Luke's craftsmanship spread beyond Stein's Pass, and occasionally travelers would make the journey to his ranch specifically to commission furniture. With Zara's encouragement, he began to think about expanding this aspect of their business, perhaps taking on an apprentice from among her older students who showed aptitude for woodworking. In late autumn, as they sat on their swing watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Zara took Luke's hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "I have news," she said softly, her eyes shining. "We're going to have a baby, Luke, in the spring." For a moment he stared at her in wonder, then gathered her carefully into his arms, burying his face against her neck. When he pulled back, Zara saw tears in his eyes, the first she'd ever witnessed from her stoic husband. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, though his reaction had already answered her question. "Happier than I have words for," he said, his hand returning to rest protectively over the place where their child grew. "Never imagined having this again, a family, a future full of hope." "You once told me you didn't need anyone," Zara reminded him gently. "That first day we really talked at the social," Luke smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Was wrong about that, needed you more than I knew, just took a porch swing and a lot of waiting to figure it out." They sat together as darkness fell, the swing gently rocking, making plans for the nursery Luke would build and the changes their child would bring to their lives. Above them, stars appeared one by one in the vast New Mexico sky, no longer distant and cold but seeming to bless the family taking shape below. "I love you, Luke Winters," Zara whispered, her head on his shoulder. "And I love you," he replied, his arms tightening around her. "More than I ever thought possible." As they sat there, wrapped in each other's warmth against the gathering chill, Luke reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a solitary man who claimed to need no one, to a husband and soon-to-be father whose heart was fuller than he'd ever imagined it could be. The porch swing beneath them, built in a moment of hope, he'd barely acknowledged even to himself, had become the symbol of their love and the center of their home. Every night, he sat here waiting. And finally, wonderfully, Zara had come, transforming his solitary existence into a life rich with love and promise. The swing rocked gently in the evening breeze, carrying them forward together into the future they would build, one day at a time, as husband and wife, as parents, as partners in all things. The cowboy who once claimed he didn't need a wife had found in Zara not just a spouse but a completion to his soul, a healing of old wounds and the promise of joy in the days to come. And that, Luke knew as he pressed a gentle kiss to his wife's temple, was worth every moment of waiting.